18 doctors stood frozen inside a private hospital room as a billionaire's baby struggled for every breath. Money had opened every door. Power had summoned the best medical minds in the country. But nothing worked. Machines beat louder, time slipped faster, and hope began to die. Then there was someone no one wanted to notice. A poor black boy, standing quietly near the doorway, invisible in a room full of privilege. He didn't belong there. At least, that's what everyone believed. But what happened next would expose more than a medical failure. It would reveal a truth people weren't ready to face. Why was he ignored until it was almost too late? The hospital was known as a sanctuary for the powerful. Located in the heart of the city, it was where CEOs, politicians, and billionaires came when only perfection was acceptable. Every hallway gleamed. Every doctor wore confidence like armor. The baby lying in that private room had been born into unimaginable wealth. His parents had built empires. They were used to winning, used to problems disappearing with a phone call or a wire transfer. But this was different. The child had been born with a rare, aggressive condition that attacked his lungs and heart at the same time. Each hour made survival less likely. 18 doctors rotated through the room. Specialists, surgeons, experts flown in from across the country. Charts filled with notes. Screens filled with numbers. But no solution appeared. Outside the room stood a boy named Elijah. He was 25 years old, black, and lived in a neighborhood most of the doctors only saw on the news. He wasn't there as a patient or a visitor. He worked as a temporary sanitation assistant, hired through a short-term contract. His job was simple: clean floors, empty bins, stay unnoticed. Elijah had grown up watching his younger sister struggle with chronic illness. Hospitals were familiar places to him, not as centers of privilege, but as spaces of waiting, fear, and unanswered prayers. He had spent years observing, learning quietly, not through textbooks, but through experience. That night, as he moved through the corridor, Elijah noticed something no one else seemed to acknowledge. The baby's breathing pattern wasn't just weak, it was irregular in a way that reminded him of something he had seen before. Something the machines weren't highlighting. He lingered near the door, unsure. He knew how this worked. People like him weren't supposed to speak in rooms like that. Especially not in places built for billionaires. But time was running out. The room grew heavier with every passing minute. Doctors adjusted settings. Nurses moved faster. The billionaire parents stood frozen, watching their child fade in front of them, powerless for the first time in their lives. Elijah watched from a distance as another specialist shook his head. The condition was worsening. Oxygen levels dropped again. The plan was becoming clear, not to save the baby, but to manage the inevitable. Elijah felt a familiar tightness in his chest. Years earlier, his sister had faced something similar. The same panic. The same confusion. The same assumption that nothing more could be done. Back then, a retired nurse had noticed a subtle pattern everyone else missed. That intervention had saved her life. Elijah saw the pattern again now. But every step toward that room felt dangerous. He knew the looks he would get. The assumptions that would be made before he ever opened his mouth. He was just a cleaner. Just another black kid in a uniform. What could he possibly contribute? Still, he stayed. As the hours passed, frustration began turning into quiet desperation. The doctors spoke in careful terms. The language of liability replaced the language of hope. The machines were now doing most of the work keeping the baby alive. Elijah's hands trembled. He replayed the signs in his mind. The timing of the breathing failures. The response to oxygen. The way the baby's chest moved, not symmetrically, but unevenly. This wasn't just a lung problem. It was neurological. The signals telling the lungs to breathe were misfiring. A detail buried beneath layers of data. Elijah finally stepped closer. He didn't interrupt. He didn't demand attention. He simply stood where someone could see him. But no one looked. When a nurse brushed past him without acknowledgement, something inside Elijah snapped, not anger, but urgency. He thought of his sister. He thought of all the times he had watched people like him be dismissed without a second thought. He spoke softly. Not loudly enough to challenge authority. Just loudly enough to be heard. The reaction was immediate. Heads turned. Faces hardened. The room shifted. A sanitation worker wasn't supposed to speak in this space. Security eyes narrowed. Doctors exchanged glances, not curious ones, but annoyed ones. Still, Elijah continued. He explained what he had noticed. The pattern. The timing. The connection between oxygen dips and neurological signals. He didn't use complex medical language. He didn't need to. He spoke from understanding. Silence followed. Then disbelief. Then irritation. Some dismissed it instantly. Others didn't respond at all. The unspoken message was clear, this was not his place. But one doctor hesitated. A younger specialist replayed the data on the monitor. Slowed it down. Matched it to what Elijah had described. Something clicked. The room shifted again, but this time, differently. Tests were rerun. Assumptions questioned. A new approach emerged, one that focused not on the lungs themselves, but on the signals controlling them. Time was nearly gone. The baby's vitals dropped sharply. There was no room left for pride. Only action. Everything moved at once. Monitors screamed. Nurses rushed. Doctors recalibrated machines with hands that now shook slightly. The room that once felt controlled and confident was now raw and exposed. The new intervention was risky. Unconventional. Untested in a case like this. But it was the only option left. The billionaire parents watched in terror as the team worked, not knowing that the turning point hadn't come from a textbook or a conference, but from a man they hadn't even noticed an hour earlier. Elijah stood against the wall, barely breathing himself. He wasn't hopeful. He was terrified. If he was wrong, he would carry that weight forever. If he was right, the room would have to face a truth far more uncomfortable than failure. Seconds stretched endlessly. Then something changed. The baby's breathing steadied. Not dramatically. Not instantly. But enough. The machines adjusted. Oxygen levels stabilized. The chaotic noise softened into rhythm. A doctor stared at the monitor, disbelief written across his face. Then another. Then all of them. The impossible was happening. Minutes passed. The improvement held. The baby wasn't out of danger, but he was no longer dying. The room fell silent. Not the silence of loss. The silence of realization. 18 doctors had failed. And the solution had come from someone society taught them to ignore. No one spoke. No one moved. Because this moment wasn't just medical. It was moral. The baby survived. Recovery was slow, fragile, uncertain, but survival itself was the miracle no one expected anymore. Elijah didn't receive applause. There was no public announcement. No headline celebrated his role. But something had shifted. Doctors began asking questions they had never asked before. About assumptions. About bias. About who gets heard and who doesn't. The billionaire parents thanked him quietly, their gratitude heavy with something deeper than relief. It carried discomfort. Awareness. A recognition of how close they had come to losing everything, not because of lack of resources, but because of invisible barriers built long before that night. Elijah returned to work the next day. Same uniform. Same job. But he walked differently. Not with pride. With clarity. He understood now that racism doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like expertise ignoring truth because of where it comes from. That hospital didn't change overnight. The world didn't either. But one child lived because someone society overlooked refused to stay quiet. And that raises a question we all need to sit with. How many lives are lost, not because answers don't exist, but because we refuse to listen to the people carrying them?